welcome to Housemans. As you may be able to tell, our event program is entirely online at the moment, but we're really happy that so many people have joined us for the first event of the year. For those of you who haven't been to one of our events before, Housemans is one of the oldest and last remaining radical bookshops in the UK. We're based in King's Cross on Caledonian Road, and we're currently open in store and online for online shopping as well. We are doing all of our events online for the foreseeable future, but we've got lots more talks and discussions booked through March. So please have a look at our website and see what else is coming up so you can join us hopefully for one of them as well. Thank you especially to everyone who's here tonight who's bought a solidarity ticket. It's incredibly important to us that we keep these events as affordable and accessible as possible, so you help us to keep running this program and having wonderful speakers come in. Tonight's event is the launch of Here to Stay, Eastern Europeans in Britain by Yva Alexandrova. Here to Stay was published in December by our very good friends at Repeater, and we're really, really excited about tonight's discussion. Yva is a Bulgarian writer and migration expert. She was head of policy and campaigns for the charity Asylum Aid and an organizer for the People's Assembly campaign group. She's in conversation with Daniel Trilling. Daniel is a regular contributor to The Guardian and the London Review of Books. He's the author of Lights in the Distance, Exile and Refuge at the Borders of Europe, and Bloody Nasty People, The Rise of Britain's Far Right. There's a Q&A box for you to post your questions for Yva and Daniel at the bottom of the screen. There's also a chat so you can talk through the event, but we'd really appreciate it if you kept your specific questions to the Q&A area. It just makes it a little easier for us to run the event. We will be keeping an eye on the discussion. And if you feel like tweeting about the event, we are on Twitter at Housemans Books. I'll drop all the important and useful links in the chat so you can find us online. And to those of you who have ordered a copy of Yva's book, we will be posting them out to you in the next couple of days. With that, I'm very happy to hand over to Yva and Daniel, and I hope you enjoy tonight's event.
Okay, thanks Alice very much for that introduction. I think we're going to talk for 30 to 40 minutes now about Yva's book, and then that should leave us a good 15-20 minutes for questions if people have them, and for further discussion. So I don't have much more to say by way of introduction because Alice has done an excellent job there, very briefly introducing Yva and her new book, which we're very happy to be launching tonight. I was just thinking about the sort of current context, because obviously immigration has been this hotly politicized issue in the UK for many years now, and immigration from Eastern Europe in particular has never been that far from the center of political debate. But there were just two events in the last year that stuck in my mind when I was thinking about this earlier. One was in July 2021, so July last year. I think it was, or rather, the very end of June marked the end of the official EU settlement scheme. So this was the transitional scheme for EU citizens who were already living in the UK by which they could continue to have the same rights as they'd had under free movement. And 1st of July was supposed to be the kind of first day of a new era where, politically it was one of the many kind of full stops to Brexit that had been proclaimed over the last few years. But it got a lot less attention than some of the other kind of Brexit Day things. But I think it was a really significant moment because for me, symbolically, that was the moment at which the British state was saying quite definitely, people who come from other bits of Europe are foreigners in this country, and even if they have this, people who've got this new settled status, it gives them equivalent rights to what they might have had under free movement. It's very clearly a scheme that separates people out, and also it implied that anybody who arrives after that date, doesn't even have access to those rights. And I think it was really telling that there was almost no effort to kind of mark that or talk about, well, what does that mean? This involves millions of people who are, people's, neighbours, friends, family members, and so on in the UK. and it was glossed over. But just a few months later, the second event was sort of what erupted in October last autumn, where suddenly, you know, faced with the petrol crisis and a shortage of lorry drivers and so on, suddenly there was this newfound search for migrant workers who could come and do these jobs that only, sort of a few months before we'd been told, well, we won't be doing any of that again. These will be jobs that in future will be given to British workers. And again, I think there was very little, surprisingly, given the amount of airspace that Brexit has occupied in the last 5 or 6 years, very little effort again to kind of piece those bits of the picture together. And I think Yva's book is a really important contribution to that debate, because it helps fill in some of the quite glaring gaps in the conversation that we've got used to hearing or taking part in Britain around the issues of migration, particularly migration from Eastern Europe. So that was just some brief context in which I wanted to set our discussion. And I think, Yva can explain to us all a lot more about the particular argument she's making in the book, which I think is a really interesting mix of polemic and memoir that packs a lot into a relatively short space. And I hope we'll be able to do it justice in the time we've got this evening. So, Yva, I thought it might be quite useful just to start off by you just giving a brief overview of the sort of motivations you had for writing Here to Stay. Perhaps you could tell us sort of when the idea of writing this book first came to you, whether it was picking up on kind of arguments that you'd wanted to make for a long time, or was there a particular moment at which you thought, okay, actually people really need to understand this stuff and I need to set it out?
Great. Thanks a lot, Daniel. And thank you, Alice and Housemans, for hosting this tonight. And thanks everyone who's joined this discussion. Hopefully it will be interesting for you, both on migration and the book and Eastern Europeans. Writing the book was, I think it was happening for a long time in my head, because it was all these arguments that you have on Facebook and all these ways in which you're trying to explain to yourself what's happening and understand what is happening around you. I mean, obviously the trigger for this was Brexit, and it was Brexit in a way that made me confront a lot of things that I couldn't understand but were happening around me. A lot of sort of the discussions that were happening about migration, about Europeans, about freedom of movement, and about Eastern Europeans in particular, and how none of it made sense when I knew what my own experience was, what the experience of people around me was. Everything that I was hearing, just there was no connection. So there was clearly this void of, Eastern European voices, and the people who were being picked on the most were also not heard anywhere. So that was very much present in my head. And then also specifically the kind of space around the left where I had been active, and also the arguments coming from there, or more specifically the lack of arguments and the lack of sort of defense that I thought migration would receive. And all of this happened throughout the Brexit debates and after Brexit. And I suppose this was kind of going on in my head. And somehow then there was this idea to actually this could be a book. And I was very, very happy when Repeater said that they'd be happy to publish it, because I mean, this is my first book, and it's rare that new authors are able to publish. So this was a great opportunity.
Sure. And so I think, as you're saying, there was this idea that there was something missing from the discussion is very important. I mean, I don't know if you see your book quite as a corrective in that in that way. I mean, it does other things as well. But if there was one, I don't know if you could just try and put your finger on what sort of the main thing you felt was missing from those discussions that emerged, particularly on the left after the Brexit vote in 2016.
Yeah, I think the main thing that was missing was an understanding and an attempt to understand what Brexit actually would mean for these 3 million Europeans and Eastern Europeans. What would happen to these people, you know, and what do we as the left want to happen, and what do we fear will happen, and what do we need to do? And that was I mean, there were some people obviously thinking and talking about it, but largely this was something that remained outside of anyone's interest. And the other thing is also not just on the left, but the broader sort of British society. You don't hear Eastern Europeans. You usually hear stories about Eastern Europeans, and usually they're negative stories about who's stolen something or whose jobs have been taken. And there is very little of our own experiences. And I think that was particularly clear for me, because what I was feeling, what I was seeing happening with Brexit, this, as I said earlier, this wasn't reflected in the sort of narratives going on in the stories, in the news, in the commentary, and our voice was completely unheard. There were no Eastern Europeans being asked what are we doing here? Why are we here? What will happen to us? And I felt that was something that definitely was definitely missing, and that was a great motivation behind writing the book.
Yeah, so I think there you've hit on, you know, this idea that you didn't think people were discussing enough the implications of Brexit for EU citizens in the UK generally, but obviously Eastern European people from Eastern Europe in particular. And I think that certainly sort of fits with my impressions of the way things were dealt with politically, well, both before and after the referendum. In fact, that you know, this was a decision that had huge implications for the, first of all, for the rights of several million people, but also had these kind of huge cultural implications as well, because it's about, you know, the decisions about, you know, the EU is in one sense a kind of dry bureaucratic organization that countries can or, you know, can choose to belong to or not, but there are kind of huge implications about identity and culture that come along with that. And, you know, those things were talked about in terms of what does this say about Britain and Britain's relation to Europe, but very little about, well, what does this say about the large number of people who are part of British society, who have got their roots in other parts of Europe. And what the conversation was often dominated by instead, and I think, I don't know how much you would agree with this, was this idea of the migrants, the people who were using free movement to come and live in the UK, as being talked about in purely sort of economistic terms. So the debate, and I think this was particularly true with people from Eastern Europe for reasons that we might be able to get into shortly, it was all about, you know, whether it was kind of pro or anti, it was about what use are these people to the UK, and it was very, very kind of thin. The discussion beyond that was very, very thin. I think this is a good point actually to just talk about a little bit about the historical context of that, because this is also something that struck me, being the grandchild of Eastern European immigrants personally, in one sense, that something that struck me over the last 10 years or so is how Eastern European immigration to the UK, however you want to define that, is talked about as if it's a new phenomenon. You know, I'm the product of people who arrived in the UK from the territories that we think of as Eastern Europe in the 1920s and 1930s. There are also, you know, obvious examples going much further back as well. But I think when we use the phrase Eastern European immigration in the UK at the moment, it's referring to a specific phenomenon that's got more recent roots. So I think it'd be good if you could just explain to us a little bit about that, but also how useful it is to talk about that as Eastern European, as a part of migration that's usefully separated off, say, from people coming from other parts of Europe to the UK.
Yeah, I think it's, I think Eastern Europeans, Eastern European migration to the UK is an interesting phenomenon, and one, as you say, has quite, goes back quite a long time, but actually when mostly it's talked about in relation to the enlargement of the European Union, although there was quite a big wave of Polish immigration that happened during the war. There was also the arrivals of the Russian Jews who came as a result of the pogrom. So there have been migrations to the UK, and not in small numbers. But the main sort of event was around the enlargement of the EU in the beginning of the 2000s, when, and again, we talk about Eastern Europeans, but it was largely people from Poland that came at that time, and a little bit from Slovakia and from Hungary. Bulgarians and Romanians started arriving much later, around 2007, when we joined the European Union, and we came with more limitations on the right to work. So it's not really a homogeneous movement on the one hand side, but on the other hand side, I think it's something that has happened outside traditionally of the kind of British Empire. Britain is used to migration from its empire. It's used to migration from the Windrush generation, from Bangladeshi, from Southeast Asia, from all of these areas where Britain had an empire. And Eastern Europeans somehow don't fit in this, because we don't come from an area that had a direct relevance to empire. And I think that's specifically important in relation to the British left, because the British left has a very clear understanding of what empire, and a very critical understanding of what empire was. And as a consequence, it has an understanding of migration from empire, and it was very supportive of migrants when they came, and it organized jointly, and it helped helped a lot in this process. This didn't happen with regard to Eastern Europeans, and it largely didn't happen because Eastern Europeans fell in this sort of gray zone of non-empire, and I suppose a lot of people weren't very clear where they need to put us. I think there was also a very, very big misunderstanding or lack of understanding of what freedom of movement meant, and freedom of movement in particular for Eastern Europeans, because we have been living in during socialism in very closed systems. People weren't basically allowed to. Most normal people weren't allowed to leave the countries, and when we joined the European Union, and when freedom of movement became your right to move across the whole continent without anyone asking you where you're going, who are you going to visit, how long are you going to stay, how much money you have in your bank account, what is your relationship to these people. All these questions that we had to answer when applying for visas were gone, and this created an enormous opportunities for all of us. Not just in terms of being able to travel, but being received as equal, being received as European citizens, and not as someone who, and I think many of us in the book share this experience of sort of coming and not feeling exactly where you're going and trying to prove yourself, but not being sure exactly what you're proving. And freedom of movement was this equalizing right that the EU gave. So the European Union, for many of us, was not this sort of neoliberal trade bloc that the left didn't like, but this was simultaneously not just a union of states, but a union of people, and this was the most fundamental of freedoms that the EU introduced. And I think that's also something that largely went ununderstood. And I think in that particular context, trying to understand and trying to seeking out people who could talk about this and the importance of it was really a missed opportunity.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I think your book, as well as trying to provide a corrective in terms of the arguments that are being made, actually what it also tries to do is contribute voices to the conversation that had been missed out. And I think because obviously you don't just write about your own experiences, the book features interviews with a range of different people who have come to live or work or study in the UK. I don't know over how long, the past decade, maybe past 2 decades. But I think that idea of there being this kind of misunderstanding is really interesting, because I think, yes, you're right that on the one hand, there was a kind of misrecognition of sort of misunderstanding of what freedom of movement might mean to people, that it might be more than a simple kind of economic calculation, and that it's about, it's about rights and freedom, but also about kind of being part of a shared culture and so on. But I think there's also a particular kind of, I guess, I don't know, maybe encounter is the right word, between Britain and Eastern Europe, however you want to define that, where there's a bit of mutual misunderstanding, actually, that I think you write very interestingly about in the book. So I think on the British side, there's these kind of stereotypes that people who come from Eastern Europe must all be poor and uneducated, and even there's a kind of, there's obviously the kind of right-wing malicious version of that stereotype, which is these are sort of uncultured, lower class people who are just here to take jobs, and they don't know how to behave in society properly, and they steal the Queen's swans and barbecue them, and all this kind of tabloid crap that we've had over the years. But there's even a kind of well-meaning liberal version of that, which still sees people as kind of poor and uneducated and not really lacking any agency, and if they are undermining wages, it's not their fault, and we just have to kind of make a tweak to the system, and they'll all happily go back to their villages and so on. And obviously that's kind of a sort of wildly inaccurate sort of stereotype, but I wonder if it also works a bit the other way around, that people who've come from Eastern Europe to the UK also are a little bit shocked about what they find, and that it doesn't necessarily match up to their expectations, either socially or culturally, or in terms of the jobs they thought they might be able to access when they arrived. And the thing that was making me think about that was just the bit of from your own kind of memoir element of the book, where you talk about your first encounter with the UK, which is quite a long, that was during childhood, wasn't it? I just thought it would be nice if you could just tell us a little bit about that, because I think that kind of sums up this idea of how these encounters, they can be really rich and productive, but there's often a lot of, people have their conceptions and their illusions swiftly dispelled when you actually go to live somewhere else.
Yeah, I think first of all, on the sort of economics of migration, I think a lot of the discussions around immigration, and I think in the UK particularly, that was sort of set in the early 90s, this narrative of migrants as contributors, and those migrants who contribute economically, obviously, they're the good migrants. And then there are all these sort of not so good migrants that don't contribute, but some of them are some poor refugees that we need to take, and some of them we don't want to take at all. So this distinction was created that some migrants are good and some migrants are bad, which doesn't really reflect the reality of migration. I mean, you know this as well as I do, and in your book, Lights in the Distance, you trace very well these kind of what triggers people to move, what happens while they move, and how their personal experience changes the way when they arrive, what happens to them. And these are all, these don't fit the sort of populist versions of what migrants do or don't do for society. And I think Eastern Europeans sort of benefited a little bit from that narrative in the beginning, because we started coming when the economy was booming. There was all these jobs available. Eastern Europeans were happy to take the shitty jobs and the unpaid jobs, and everyone sort of was happy with this arrangement for a while. But the reality is, and then people started wondering, oh, but why are these Eastern Europeans not integrating? Why are they still speaking their languages? We don't like these languages. We don't understand anything. What are they talking about? And because the kind of true integration in society happens after you've become economically active, after you receive the rights, and after you feel yourself you're part of this society, then you start giving the interesting parts about yourself. Then you develop your ideas, your creativity, you have the opportunity to challenge things. Most of the time, initially, you just kind of try and keep your head low and not get into confrontation. And it is only after you start, and also feeling accepted, that you actually feel like, oh, okay, so then maybe I can do something else. And this is this was my experience as well. Maybe I can be active politically. That's not something that has a direct economic contribution, but I'm here, I'm an EU citizen, so why not? I care about the society, so why not? So that's on the kind of economic part of migration. And I think that's still a discussion that needs to be had, and it's still an argument that needs to be won, that migration is not just measured in GDP growth, that migration is something that is a larger social and political phenomenon, and we need to work on it on that basis. In terms of the sort of stereotypes and experiences, yes, in the book I talk about, so my family came to live in the UK in the 90s, and in 89, and this was still while there was socialism, so Bulgaria was still under socialism, and we had these sort of great expectations about, we went to live in Nottingham, so we had these great expectations about life in the UK, and a lot of them were met. I mean, we lived in a much bigger house, and we went, the shops were full of very interesting sweets and chewing gum, which was my main interest at that time. But there were also some quite shocking experiences. I remember particularly the food in the canteen in the school. I was quite perplexed, because we were told that we are poor. We come from Eastern Europe, and we come from a socialist country, and we are poor. But in my poor school, and I went to a local school in Sofia, nothing grand, but we had every day kind of variety of meals. Everything was freshly cooked. Every day you could choose something else. So I didn't feel particularly poor or hungry. And then in the UK, we had every day the same thing. There was no Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday menu. Every day was the same. And it was mostly, fried fish fingers, fried beans, chips, mushy peas, and repeat. And that was something that I found very, very confusing. about life in the UK. And then later on, of course, and a lot of the people in the book also share their stories. I interviewed, and some of them are actually here tonight, so I want to thank them very much for their time and their stories, because they made the book very a lot more sort of alive, and a lot it became more three-dimensional. And we all came with this expectation in the UK, especially that this is, the place where progressive thought happens, the place where radical ideas are developed, the place where equality matters, the place where respect for other people matters, in a way that it didn't matter in other places, or they weren't so well known. And then the shock of that actually, here you're these people are as uninterested and you're as anonymous as anyone else. And even, some sort of, especially on the sort of liberal left side, we encountered the same prejudice, the same sort of disparaging treatment, the same sort of, this way where you're made to doubt yourself whether you should be there at all. So no one would say anything directly, but there was lack of interest in your experience, lack of interest. I remember one of the people in the book, actually, Dana, she is a Romanian artist, and they created this sort of performance which was called Hookah Job. And they did all these kind of fairground games, but they were made around kind of immigration experiences. And she told me that when she went to galleries and kind of art spaces and presented this project, people told her, oh no, we don't think this is reflective of the Eastern European experience. We don't think you're right. And these were, very nice middle-class English people who were explaining to her that wasn't her experience. So yeah, I think that sort of clash between what we expected and what we saw, and yeah, other people also talk about kind of the rose-tinted glasses that you come to the UK with, and then you realize that the reality is quite challenging. But I think on a kind of positive note, I think most of the people in the book, and that's why the book is called Here to Stay, I think most of us do feel a very strong connection to the UK and to society and to all these values that we were looking for, and we know they're there. They may not be everywhere, and you may have to kind of dig deeper and challenge, but they are there, and I think that's the reason why many people still have stayed in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think these kind of difficulties that you describe that people experience at the same time as they're persevering and making lives for themselves are very common to migration, at different places, different times. And I suppose the kind of sort of the narrative, sort of liberal narrative of progress, is that you just need to give these things time, and that's what's happened to previous generations of immigrants, and it will happen again if people stick it out, keep making these efforts to make connections, kind of learn about one another and so on. And there's definitely some truth to that, but what can happen is that political, things can go backwards as well as forwards, and political events can really disrupt things. And I think in this story, it's the Brexit vote that plays that role. So I'm just mindful a bit of time now, and I thought let's just spend kind of the last chunk of our conversation talking about the politics in a bit more detail, and then we'll leave it a little bit of time for people to ask questions as well. But I just repeat what Alice said when she introduced our conversation and say that you're very welcome to put your questions into the Q&A box now. So if you have questions that are in your minds already, put them down, and then I can keep an eye on those and make sure that you get a chance to put those to Yva before our time is up. But yes, so I think most of us have heard more about Brexit than we would ever like to, so we don't have to kind of rake over the coals of that in too much detail. But I think what I'm interested to know is that I think the sense that I got from your book is that okay, there are reasons why a majority of people in the UK voted for Brexit, and what was or was not done in the run-up to the referendum by people who campaigners on either side of that debate, which I think we can leave to one side, because I think what comes across more strongly in your book is that I think you feel there was a real kind of missed opportunity for the left, particularly after the referendum vote, that instead of perhaps recognizing that this was a moment in which people's rights needed to be defended, or recognizing on that kind of broader level that you've already talked about, that this is an issue that concerns millions of people who have lives here and is going to affect them directly, that the left didn't do that. Instead of doing that, it got drawn down these various different kind of alleyways, and what I think you at least would see as sort of dead ends politically, and that there could have been another way for the left to respond to what happened. And I just wondered if you could just say a few words about that now.
Yeah, I think there was sort of three ways the left have engaged with this, with migration more broadly, and with Eastern European migration more specifically. One was the issue of rights and what will happen, and no one ever said, what will happen to Eastern Europeans. And even when the settlement scheme was being brought in, it was clear that the rights that we enjoyed, which was equal rights with British citizens, would be taken away, and then there would be a new system for which you have to apply. You may or may not get it, and then your rights will be dependent on that new system. So immediately that was a derogation of rights. And that's even in the best case scenario, when you can apply and you get that status. There are still, I think, thousands of people who've not received an answer to their application. There are vulnerable people, there are children and people with all sorts of challenges and disabilities that have still not applied for this. So this is a ticking bomb. And so that was something that, okay, we've had the referendum, everyone's sort of had their moment of shock, and, mistakes have been made, but, whatever, going forward. And that was indeed something that also never happened. And that reckoning didn't happen. The other part was specifically about the left, which is that the majority of Eastern European migrants are working class people. I think about 70% of people are in low or middle skilled jobs, and which are the low wage job, the 0-hour contracts, the sort of meat processing plants, the farms. And so these are the left's sort of natural allies. These are their natural constituents. These are the people they should both be defending and drawing on for their support. And that was also just sort of a complete gray area. I think some unions try to do some organizing around Eastern Europeans, but nowhere to the extent needed, or to the influence that could have. And then the last sort of argument is around Brexit was and still is a sort of culture war it's a war between sort of values of internationalism and inclusion and diversity, and nationalism, inward lookingness, and sort of being closed from the world. And it's essentially the sort of a racist backward project in a very blunt of ways, and which also doesn't fit with an internationalist sort of progressive vision of what society should look like. And in that cultural war, somehow the left just sided with the wrong guys. It ended up in alliance with you know, the Nigel Farages in the really right wing, and that is also something that hasn't been reckoned with. That is also something that hasn't really been understood, and I think. You know, after Brexit, my own personal sort of journey went like this. I was very active politically before Brexit. Then Brexit happened. It really sort of broke my heart and broke my interest in being engaged in any way with the UK society. I withdrew back from politics. And I was just hoping that, you know, things would calm down and we could, you know, find some sensible way of moving forward. And then that didn't happen either. And then 2019 came, and then, you know, first 2017 came, and then Jeremy Corbyn had this big victory, and everyone was very optimistic and kind of hoping that things could change. And then 2019 happened and everything imploded. And still, through all of these sort of moments of crises, the discussion about particularly Eastern European migration and what role that played in sort of the demise of the left didn't take place. And I think ultimately I decided that if no one's done it, I probably have to write this book. And so here we are.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I just want to maybe unpack the sort of your ideas about what the left did and got wrong a little bit more, because I suppose there are, you know, the left people will define that in lots of different ways. So I think it might help to just sort of separate out some things. I guess there's you know, it's kind of one group of people who might see themselves as kind of liberal, left-leaning, who would also identify very strongly with the Remain cause, who might bristle at the suggestion that they had ended up on the side of Farage and so. But I think, as I understand it from your argument, I think you know, there's a kind of, there was always a current on the left that was a kind of minority current that was kind of pro-Brexit, but for socialist reasons, which, you know, is kind of the stuff nicknamed Lexit. But I think, and, you know, that's, at least it's a clear position and you can kind of agree or disagree with it and have that argument out. But I think more broadly, and maybe, I don't know if I'm right picking up the sense from your book that this is there as well, that there was also a kind of process of calculation politically, that people who might have been fine with remaining in the EU then kind of rolled back on their efforts to sort of challenge what was happening in the UK because they thought that voters wouldn't go along with it, or I mean, this is more my opinion of it than perhaps what's in your book, but also it got caught up in some very sectarian disputes within the Labour Party. So what you had to say about Brexit or immigration or any of these bigger issues was more determined by what faction you were trying to kind of push than responses to what was actually happening out there in society. I don't know, feel free to disagree with my take on it if you like.
I think, what do I think? I think first of all, the left, when I talk about the left, I particularly mean sort of the hard left and the people around Lexit, the people who were making arguments about leaving the European Union on the basis of the, sort of neoliberal criticism of the Union. But then also these were the sort of people that came to lead the Labour Party for that sort of period, around Jeremy Corbyn, basically. And yes, for sure, there was and is a much wider, I mean, broadly speaking, most working class and left people voted Remain and supported Remain and supported a second referendum. So yes, I specifically talk about that section of the left, largely because I think by coincidence or I don't know, design or something, I ended up being there. So my experience was of that space and the debates that took part there. I think if I had been in a sort of different space, I would probably be even less frustrated and probably wouldn't have written the book because I would have felt like, yeah, people understand me, you know, they kind of, they're as angry as I am. So that's on the terminology. In terms of, the political calculation, I mean, I think that was one of the sort of moments when the Corbyn project for me is starting to kind of feel a bit like it's coming apart. Because for a very long time, even if you didn't agree with sort of Corbyn's view of the world, and those around him, of course, it's not just, this is not a personal thing. You kind of took it that, you know, their position was principled, that they would take the right position, even if that's politically detrimental to them. And of course, when you come to power, things change. And I think this is what happened with the Labour leadership, that when they came to power, and they unfortunately came to power in this very divisive moment, historical moment of Brexit, that they didn't really want, they didn't support, they didn't vote for. Most of them voted Remain in the referendum. They just wanted it to go away. I think their big mistake was not recognizing that it isn't going away, and you really need to engage with this because that is the issue of the moment. And then, yes, then came this calculation, which, you know, we have to be really mindful of these disenchanted Leave voters who are in these northern areas. But all of this is also largely stereotypical. There are people, many people in the north also voted Remain. And I think that, you know, sort of this otherwise a very brave project, a project that really, you know, it wanted to take sort of the established order. It had a vision of creating a more fair and just society. It kind of backtracked on something that was very important in creating this fair and just society, which is what do we do with, you know, people who are, you know, aren't from here. And I think that political calculation, you know, backfired spectacularly, and it also sort of started eroding the vitality of the project. A lot of activists also felt disenchanted, and I think that was sort of the beginning of the end of that political project.
Yeah, I mean, it's also striking, I think, more broadly that at least the way I remember it, you had that kind of erosion of the project around Corbyn on the one hand by kind of failing to sort of take a stand in a clear way on it, but also I think a lot of the kind of leading Remain politicians, so the kind of Remain wing of Labour that was very vocal and often also very anti-Corbyn, but also the stuff that was being said by the leading bits of the Remain campaign in the run-up to the referendum was basically being part of the EU is great, but we can also we can stay in the EU and limit this immigration. You know, there was a kind of wider failure to just put forward an argument that actually the rights of migrants should be defended, and that we should have a different way of thinking about this, other than this is something that is people have decided is bad and we should just be debating ways to bring it down or stop it and so on.
Yeah. And I think that was sort of the legacy of the last, maybe from kind of the 90s going on into the late 2000s. And I think this combination of, migration is good because it's economically good. And then you hit sort of a kind of, you have the 2008 financial crisis, and then all of a sudden you have austerity, and all of a sudden things are not looking so great. And you need a scapegoat, and migrants quite often in societies become that scapegoat. And unfortunately, the whole political sort of elite didn't really engage in it. And there was also some, this sort of really fictitious, I think, debates about whether, maybe we should have, maybe Eastern Europeans are these privileged migrants and Europeans are these privileged migrants, and we should actually have the much less privileged migrants from somewhere else. That were some proposals that were coming around that. Or that, but we need to really defend Europeans' rights because the Europeans are, part of, we want to be part of the EU, and we want to be part of, and Europeans are somehow special and different from other migrants because they're European, which is the sort of also equally ridiculous. And it was, there is no broader understanding. There's no desire to have this debate. There's no desire to understand migration and what moves people and what it means when people move and how you can use that for the kind of benefit of societies.
Yeah, absolutely. And so basically, if anybody wants to ask a question, now is the time to put your question into that Q&A box. We've got, 5-10 minutes left. So don't be shy if there's something you really want to ask or a contribution you'd like to make. Otherwise, I've got a final question for Yva, which maybe we can get to now and then see if anything else comes up. I just wanted to end kind of on a slightly more forward-looking note because, in a way, I don't think Brexit is completely behind us in the UK, but that period of sort of paralysis as, politicians tried to pass a Brexit deal and the particular form Brexit would take was endlessly debated, is kind of past us now. And with sort of what's happened over the last couple of years, the kind of changes in the economy that the pandemic has brought as well, we're in quite a different situation. So that, last autumn's panic about labour shortages in key sectors of the economy, I think is much more, that's really kind of set the tone for the sort of debates that we're likely to be having in the years to come. And I just wondered if you had thoughts on where that leaves this wider issue that we've been talking about. Then new sort of, I don't know, I suppose where do we go from here in terms of what can people now constructively do to sort of avoid making the same mistakes that have been made in the past? Or are there even like grounds for sort of hope about where things might improve or might be improved now?
I think what you said in the beginning of our conversation was very important about the sort of the truck driver crisis and how that seemed to strike the attention of the public and the kind of zeitgeist of the moment. I think on the positive side, I think the difference in the way that story was covered was that there were a lot more sort of even interviews with Eastern European drivers where people genuinely laughed and were baffled at how you can, it's like a couple of months apart that you've just literally kicked us out. You wanted everyone to leave. You didn't want anyone here because you didn't like us. And now here you are, 3 months later, you're asking us if we, take another job. And I think this on the one hand side, is, I think it's a, personally, it's a sort of sense of a little bit of triumph. But I think for the UK, it's a realization that you now have to compete. and if you want people to come, and you do want people to come because that's how, your economy is set up, you have to now, why would they come to the UK? They can go to 20 other countries in the EU and North America and all these other places that have much better weather. But it's so that's one, I think, sobering, hopefully, a realization for the UK political elite, that this is something that you have to reckon with now, and hopefully that could, open the space for thinking about how you can do this in a way that is positive and in a way that is beneficial for everybody involved, the migrants and the society they come in. And there are ways to do this. This migration is a process which can be managed, and what you put in place usually usually shows what the result of it will be. So this is not something that is uncharted territory. This is just a question of political will, I think, largely. So, hopefully we'll see some of that political will shifting. Or not, or we can also continue in a way, sort of, maybe there is other migrants that will come, and we just can use those and not really think about it. But I think that's why, again, I think it's not so much what the economy and the sort of government would do. I think the question is, what do we want the left and kind of progressives to do? And I think there is the space is wide open. Actually, a lot of people, some people told me, Eastern Europeans that read the book, they said, yeah, you're right. I actually wondered why I never really got involved politically with the UK left, and kind of the experience and the stories in the book helped them understand why, because you never felt really kind of invited. You never felt like you were part of it. At best, you were sort of tolerated. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there. There is enormous potential. There are people who can and are willing and able to, help this project move forward. But they need to be listened to, they need to be included, and they need to be part of this conversation on an equal basis. And there is also the whole sort of trade union organizing. I mean, I think they've talked about it for years, but I don't really think that's happening. I don't see that organizing, that, what you do with Eastern European workers and how you organize them. And this is an incredible force that can be used, and it's still not being tapped into. So I think these are areas of hopefully improvement, where we can start to shift some of the kind of consensus and hopefully change some of what the outcomes in the near future are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if this quite qualifies as an optimistic note to end it on exactly, but it did feel, at least, around sort of September, October time last year, as if these shortages and the kind of panic that ensued from that was finally forcing the kind of conversation that, in a way, immigration has been used to put off. Sort of people were actually finally talking about, they weren't just saying, let's stop immigration because it's undercutting wages. They were finally talking about, well, why are wages so low in Britain, and what could be done to improve working conditions, and why is it that these jobs have historically been done by people encouraged to come to the country, and so on. Obviously since then has been eclipsed by the kind of unrolling chaos of Boris Johnson's government. But you know, at least at the moment, it looks like there might be a way to actually kind of address some of these bigger issues head on. I see one question that I'll ask you to answer very quickly before we conclude, which is from Carmilla, who asks, maybe this is the last kind of question you want right now, just after publishing one, but are you planning to write another book now that we're seeing a potential shift in power in the UK government and the rise of authoritarian governments in Europe more widely?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely like to write another book. I think kind of, you know, I've had a taste of it and I like it. And I think, yeah, I think this, I mean, this book obviously doesn't, you know, pretend to give an exhaustive picture of what, you know, Eastern European migration to the UK is. I think there is a lot to, you know, a lot to unpack there. And I think, you know, as the UK changes and as Europe changes, you know, there will be new challenges and new questions. And I think that the perspective that, you know, we Eastern Europeans bring to this is definitely something that that is quite different. You know, it's quite different from kind of the older member states and the kind of Western European countries that have a similar dynamics. But Eastern Europe isn't without its problems, and I think this is what Camilla refers to: this sort of authoritarian, you know, shift in Poland, and you know, there are a lot of processes that are taking place, and ironically, they're also somehow anti-immigrant in their essence. And in Bulgaria, I quite often have conversations with people who are anti-immigrant, and which for me is baffling, because it's like, but you know, half of us in the 90s left Bulgaria. Everybody, you know, even, you know, every second family in Bulgaria has someone who is in the UK, and you know, we are facing these challenges and prejudices and you know, fighting every day for your right to be there. And that somehow doesn't reflect in how in your attitude to other people trying to come and more desperately trying to come, and people will keep coming. So I think the challenge is big, because we are faced with growing authoritarianism, and we need to be much better at organizing and much better at including people who you know, who can be allies in this, because it's not, things aren't looking rosy. But yeah, I think, to end on a positive note, I think the UK for me still is a very sort of a place where at least, you know, you can have these debates and you can have these discussions, and there are these spaces still around, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, obviously before we start talking about other books that Yva might write, I would say, first of all, I'd encourage everybody to read Yva's book, Here to Stay, which we have already, precisely because it's, you know, as you said, it's not intended to be a comprehensive survey of this issue, but I think it's intended to spark discussions, make people think more carefully about the issues at stake here. So I would say again, you know, do buy the book if you haven't already. If you've got it, read it, but also tell other people to buy it, discuss it with them, pass on the ideas. I think this will obviously benefit Yva greatly, but it will be a benefit to wider society as well. Yeah, so I think this is a nice point to leave it today. I'd just like to say thanks again to Housemans for hosting, and Repeater for helping organize this and for publishing Yva's book. And thank you very much to Yva, and thanks to everybody for joining in and being part of the conversation.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Yeah, and from my side, yeah, if you get in touch, tell me what you think, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you so much, Daniel. This was really, really interesting. And Housemans and everyone who tuned in today, thanks so much.
Okay, all right. Have a lovely evening, everyone.